Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became Gotham's new Red Hood. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world ended in a scream of fractured light and tearing sound. One moment, Izuku Midoriya, the hero known as Deku, was a whirlwind of green lightning and righteous fury. His opponent, a villain calling himself Chronomal, was a nightmare of spiraling limbs and distorted space. His quirk wasn't about strength or speed, it was about unraveling reality itself, thread by agonizing thread. The air around them warped and shimmered like a heat haze, buildings in the distance elongating and compressing with every gesture the villain made. "You heroes and your precious, static timeline!" Chronomal shrieked, his voice a discordant chorus of echoes from moments past and future. "It's a cage! I'll set everyone free! You're not freeing anyone! You're destroying everything!" Deku roared back, his voice strained. He was pushing One for All to its absolute limit, the power a thrumming sun beneath his skin. Fa Jean was coiled tight in his muscles, ready to be unleashed, while danger sense screamed a constant, high-pitched siren in the back of his skull, a sensation so overwhelming it was almost useless. The danger was everywhere. Black whip tendrils, dark and volatile, lashed out from his arms, not to strike, but to anchor. He grabbed onto the skeletal frames of half-devoured buildings, the twisted metal of overturned buses, anything to give him purchase in a world that had lost its foundation. His friends were fighting on the periphery, their own battles a chaotic symphony of explosions and shouts. But this central threat, the source of the dimensional instability, was his to shoulder. All Might's legacy, a burden and a blessing, demanded it. "Analyze, Izuku, analyze!" His mind screamed, a frantic echo of his mentor's teachings. He has to have a core, a focal point. His quirk can't be infinite. He saw it then, a flicker. In the center of Chronomal's swirling form, a point of absolute stillness, a man-shaped void where the chaotic energy originated. That was his target. "Everyone, fall back! I'm ending this now!" He yelled into his comm, hoping the signal could pierce the temporal distortion. He didn't wait for a reply. Coiling Fa Jin stored kinetic energy into his legs, he prepared for a final, desperate gambit. The second user's quirk, gearshift, engaged, altering the very laws of motion acting upon his body. He would bend inertia to his will, become a living bullet aimed at the heart of the storm. One for all, full cal. 100%! The world dissolved into a smear of green and gray. He was moving faster than sound, faster than sight. The air screamed as he tore through it. "Detroit! Smayawash!" He saw Chronomal's eyes widen, not in fear, but in manic triumph. "Too late, little hero!" the villain's chorus of voices sang. "You can't punch a concept." The villain's core didn't shatter. It opened. It wasn't an explosion of force, but of nothing. A gaping maw of silent, colorless non-existence tore open directly in his path. Deku's fist, carrying the combined power of 9 generations of heroes, plunged into the void. There was no impact. No feedback. The power, all of it, was simply swallowed. And then, the void swallowed him. Pain was the first sensation. A deep, grinding agony, as if every cell in his body was being simultaneously pulled apart and crushed together. The green lightning of One for All sputtered and died, smothered by an absolute wrongness. He felt the ghostly vestiges of the previous wielders recoil within him, their collective consciousness screaming a silent warning. He felt a lurch, a nauseating tumble through dimensions that had no name, past sights that would drive a sane man to madness. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it ended. He was spat out of the chaos and into the hard, unforgiving reality of wet asphalt. The impact knocked the last of the air from his lungs. His vision swam in a sea of black spots. The world was blessedly, terrifyingly still. The roar of battle was gone. The screaming was gone. The only sounds were the frantic thumping of his own heart, the distant wail of a strange-sounding siren, and the soft, rhythmic patter of a miserable, unending drizzle. Blackness claimed him. Izuku awoke to the smell of decay. It was a thick, cloying miasma of wet garbage, stale urine, and something vaguely metallic, like old blood. It clung to the back of his throat and made him want to gag. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. Every joint ached, a deep, resonant pain that spoke of extreme overexertion and a rough landing. He took stock of his surroundings. He was in an alley, narrow and claustrophobic. The walls were brick, stained black with grime and covered in a language he recognized as English, scrawled in angry, overlapping layers of spray paint. A single, flickering bulb high above cast a sickly yellow-orange glow, illuminating the glistening dampness on the ground and the hulking shape of a rusted dumpster. The sky above was a sliver of bruised purple, choked with a perpetual, unnatural twilight. Hello? He called out, his voice hoarse. It was absorbed by the oppressive silence of the alley. He tapped the side of his cowl. Uraraka? Ida-kun? Can anyone hear me? Static. A dead, empty hiss was the only reply. A cold dread, far more chilling than the damp air, began to seep into his bones. He fumbled with the damaged comms unit, prying open the casing. The internal circuitry was fried, blackened, and warped. Unsalvageable. He looked at himself. His costume was a wreck. The dark green fabric was torn in multiple places, revealing the bruised and scraped skin beneath. The metal plates of his arm guards were dented and scratched, the iron soles of his boots scuffed beyond recognition. His cowl was ripped near the ear, and one of the ears drooped pathetically. He looked less like a hero and more like a casualty. He stumbled out of the alley, leaning against the cold, damp brick for support. The street he emerged onto was no better. The buildings were monolithic titans of concrete and grimy glass, looming over the street like ancient, decaying tombstones. Gargoyles, twisted into snarling, demonic shapes, perched on the cornices, their stone eyes seeming to watch him with silent malice. The architecture was all wrong, too sharp, too gothic, too grim. It felt like a city perpetually caught in a sigh of despair. A few lonely figures scurried along the sidewalk, heads down, shoulders hunched against the rain and the world. No one made eye contact. No one smiled. The air itself felt heavy, saturated not just with moisture and smog, but with a palpable sense of fear and resignation. It was a stark, brutal contrast to the bright, bustling streets of Muzutafu, where even in the wake of disaster, there was an undercurrent of hope, of resilience. Here, there was only a slow, grinding erosion of the soul. Where was he? This wasn't any city in Japan he recognized. The language, the architecture, the sheer, unrelenting bleakness of it all, it was alien. His stomach growled, a painful, hollow ache. He hadn't eaten since before the battle with Chronomo. How long had that been? Hours? A day? He had no way of knowing. He was injured, alone, and completely, utterly lost. But the instinct, the one All Might had nurtured in him from the very beginning, was still there, buried beneath the confusion and the pain. I'm a hero. I help people. It was the one solid piece of ground in his crumbling world. He could be lost, he could be hurt, but he could still be a hero. He just needed to find someone to help. As if on cue, a scream cut through the night. It wasn't the theatrical shriek of a villain's victim from his world. It was a short, sharp, terrified sound, quickly muffled. It came from another alley just down the street. Without a second thought, his training took over. He pushed off the wall, his aching muscles protesting as he broke into a sprint. One for all flickered to life, a pathetic 5%, but it was enough. The world slowed to a crawl as he closed the distance in a handful of silent, impossibly fast strides. He rounded the corner into the alley and saw the scene, a grim tableau under the sputtering neon sign of a derelict pawn shop. Two men, burly and dressed in grimy leather jackets, had an older man pinned against the wall. One held a knife to the man's throat, while the other rifled through his pockets. The hero in him surged forward. This was familiar. This, he knew how to handle. He landed between the assailants and their victim, his posture straight, his fists clenched. He put on his most reassuring smile, the one he practiced in the mirror 1,000 times, the one that was supposed to mirror All Might's. "It is all right," he declared, his voice ringing with a confidence he didn't feel. He waited for the beat, for the moment of recognition and relief. "Why?" "Because I am here." The two thugs just stared at him. There was no fear, no awe. Just confusion, followed by a simmering annoyance. "The hell is this?" The one with the knife grunted, his eyes scanning Izuku's bizarre, tattered costume. Some kinda street performer? Get lost, kid. This ain't your business. What you're doing is wrong, Izuku said, his smile faltering. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Let him go, and no one has to get hurt. The second thug chuckled, a low, guttural sound. He pulled a wallet from the old man's coat and then shoved him to the ground. Then, he reached into his own jacket. Izuku's danger sense gave a faint, specific prickle just a moment before the man pulled out a handgun. It wasn't a futuristic laser weapon or some kind of support gear. It was a simple, ugly, black pistol, and he pointed it directly at Izuku's chest. Izuku froze. Guns. Real, lethal firearms. Street-level criminals in Japan rarely used them. Quirks were the weapons of choice. The police force was specialized, hero agencies had protocols. To see one brandish so casually, with such clear intent to use it, sent a jolt of ice through his veins. Last chance, funny bunny, the gunman snarled. Hop on out of here before I put a hole in that stupid mask. Izuku's mind raced. His approach had been all wrong. This wasn't a world of flashy quirks and heroic posturing. This was a world of cold steel and casual violence. He needed to adapt, and fast. The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger. Flick. Izuku moved. He didn't even use a named smash. A simple, 8% flick of his middle finger sent a compressed pellet of air screaming through the alley. It wasn't aimed at the man, but at the gun itself. The impact was surgical. The gun was ripped from the thug's grasp, spinning through the air before embedding itself in the dumpster with a deafening clang. The man howled, clutching his hand, his fingers clearly broken. The other thug, the one with the knife, lunged. Izuku sidestepped with effortless grace, his body a blur. He chopped the man's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife, then swept his legs out from under him. The thug hit the ground with a wet, heavy thud. It was over in less than a second. Both criminals were neutralized, groaning on the wet ground. Izuku stood over them, his heart pounding, the adrenaline from the brief, terrifying encounter leaving him shaky. He had been careful, using just enough force to disarm them without causing permanent injury. He turned to the victim, his smile returning, albeit a bit shakier this time. Are you all right, sir? The old man wasn't looking at him with gratitude. He was staring, his eyes wide with a different kind of emotion, pure, undiluted terror. His gaze flickered from the gun embedded in the solid steel of the dumpster, to the unconscious forms of the muggers, and finally to Izuku, the boy in the tattered green costume who moved faster than a bullet. The man scrambled backwards, crab walking away from Izuku as if he were the monster. Freak, he stammered, his voice trembling. Get away from me! Just another one of this city's freaks! He got to his feet and fled, stumbling out of the alley and disappearing into the night without a backwards glance. Izuku stood alone in the alley, the rain starting to fall a little harder, mixing with the filth on the ground. The words echoed in his head. Freak. Not hero. Not savior. Freak. He had saved someone. But he hadn't made them feel safe. In their eyes, he was just a different, more powerful brand of monster let loose on their streets. A fundamental pillar of his heroic creed, the one about inspiring hope and security, had just crumbled into dust. This city, this dark, cynical, and terrified place, it operated by a different set of rules, and he didn't know how to play. The next few days were a blur of hunger, cold, and a deepening, gnawing loneliness. Izuku abandoned his tattered hero costume, stashing it carefully in a hidden alcove he found in an abandoned building that became his temporary shelter. In the threadbare civilian clothes he had been wearing underneath, a simple t-shirt and jeans, now damp and grimy, he was just another piece of the city's downtrodden tapestry. He was invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that didn't know he existed. His first priority was information. Survival was instinct, but understanding was paramount. He found a public library, a grand, Gothic structure that looked more like a cathedral dedicated to forgotten knowledge. He spent hours huddled in front of a public computer terminal, the glow of the screen a stark contrast to the gloom of his reality. He typed in the first, most obvious question, where am I? The answer was a gut punch, Gotham City, New Jersey, USA. He was on a different continent. possibly in a different world entirely. The news articles he read painted a horrifying picture. Gotham wasn't just a city, it was a failed state, a place locked in a perpetual war with itself. He read about rampant corruption in the police force and city hall, about untouchable crime lords who ran entire sections of the city like their personal fiefdoms, and he read about the villains. The names were a litany of madness: Penguin, Riddler, Scarecrow. But one name appeared more than any other, always accompanied by stories of senseless, anarchic violence. A name that made the blood run cold even on a sterile computer screen: the Joker. Most chillingly, none of the articles mentioned quirks. They spoke of metahumans, a seemingly rare and often feared phenomenon, but not the widespread, society-defining reality he knew. This Joker, this monster responsible for so much death and chaos, was, by all accounts, just a man. The thought was more terrifying than any quirk-wielding villain he had ever faced. A being of pure, unadulterated human malice. Then, he discovered the other side of the coin. He read about the Batman. His hero analyst's brain, a part of him he thought had gone dormant, flickered back to life. He devoured every piece of information he could find: grainy photos, speculative articles, terrified eyewitness accounts. A vigilante. A myth. A man who dressed like a bat, and used fear as his primary weapon. He had no powers, no quirk, yet he stood against the tide of Gotham's madness. He was a brilliant detective, a master strategist, a technological genius. Izuku felt a confusing cocktail of emotions. There was awe, of course. The sheer audacity of a powerless man taking on such a dark world was the very definition of heroism. It resonated with the quirkless boy he used to be, the one who dreamed in the face of impossibility. He found himself sketching in a small, water-damaged notebook he'd scavenged, his old habits dying hard. He analyzed the Batmobile's rumored specs, the aerodynamic properties of the cape, the possible composition of the body armor. But alongside the awe, there was a deep sense of unease. Batman's methods were brutal, his presence terrifying. He didn't smile to reassure the public. He lurked in the shadows to terrify the wicked. He didn't inspire hope. He weaponized fear. It was the antithesis of everything All Might had taught him. A hero should be a symbol of peace, a beacon of hope. Batman was a symbol of vengeance, a creature of the night. Could that be what this city needed? A hero as dark as the world he was trying to save? The question troubled him deeply. He learned about the others too. The Bat family, the internet forums called them. Nightwing, Red Robin, Oracle, and a previous Robin who had died, only to return as a violent, gun-wielding anti-hero called the Red Hood. The story was tragic, filled with a pain and rage that felt uncomfortably familiar to the tempest brewing in his own soul. The more he learned, the more his isolation grew. This world had its own heroes, its own rules. There was no UA High, no pro-hero system, no safety net. There was just the Bat, his soldiers, and the endless, ravenous dark. He was an anomaly, a variable in an equation he couldn't begin to comprehend. The hope of finding a way home began to feel like a childish fantasy. He spent his nights trying to help in small ways, a green-clad ghost in the city's periphery. He'd stop a purse snatching here, a break-in there, always moving too fast to be seen clearly, a blur of motion and a gust of wind. But he never spoke to anyone he saved. The memory of the old man's fearful eyes was a brand on his conscience. He was effective, but he wasn't a hero. Not anymore. He was just a solution to a problem. The hunger was a constant companion, a dull ache that sharpened into a piercing pain. He scavenged what he could, but it was never enough. The despair was a suffocating blanket, threatening to extinguish the last embers of his spirit. He was just a boy, lost and alone, in a city that ate hope for breakfast. It was during one of these moments of utter despair, huddled in an alley to escape a sudden downpour, that he found it. Or rather, it found him. The scent of hot soup cut through the stench of the alley. It was a rich, savory aroma that made his empty stomach clench with a painful, desperate longing. He followed the scent, his feet moving before his mind had made a conscious decision. It led him to a small, unassuming storefront tucked between a boarded-up laundromat and a pawn shop. A simple, hand-painted sign hung above the door. Martha's Kitchen. Light and warmth spilled from the windows, a stark beacon in the surrounding gloom. Inside, he could see a small crowd of people, the city's forgotten and disenfranchised, huddled at tables, cradling steaming bowls in their hands. He stood across the street, hidden in the shadows, watching. It was a small act of kindness in a city built on cruelty. A tiny island of warmth in a sea of cold. It was the first genuinely hopeful thing he had seen since his arrival. But he couldn't bring himself to go in. Pride? Fear? A sense of not belonging, of being an outsider who didn't deserve a place at their table? He didn't know. He just watched, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, his stomach a hollow pit of need. You know, you'll catch your death of cold standing out here. The voice made him jump. He spun around, his body instantly tensing for a fight. A girl stood there, holding a large, black umbrella over her head. She couldn't have been much older than him, maybe 17 or 18. She had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through his guarded posture, and a cascade of dark, curly hair that was escaping her beanie. She was holding a steaming styrofoam cup in her free hand. "You've been standing there for 10 minutes, she said, her voice devoid of judgment. It was just a statement of fact. Figured you were either casing the joint or working up the courage to come in. You don't look like a crook. So," she held out the cup. "Here. Tomato soup. Grandma's recipe. It's a little thin tonight, had to stretch it, but it's hot." Izuku stared at the cup, then at her. He didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight. "It's not poisoned," she said with a wry smile. "Promise." He took the cup, his cold fingers fumbling. The warmth seeped into his hands, a small, shocking comfort. Thank you?" he managed to stammer, his voice raspy from disuse. "Don't mention it," she said, shifting the umbrella to cover him a little more. "I'm Maya, by the way. I'm Izuku." He omitted his last name. It felt like a relic from a life that no longer existed. Maya's eyes flickered over his worn clothes, the haunted look in his eyes, the subtle but clear tension in his body that spoke of someone constantly ready for a threat. She was street smart. She had to be, to survive here. But where others would see a threat or a victim, she seemed to see just a person. "You new to the Narrows, Izuku?" she asked, her tone conversational. He just nodded, taking a tentative sip of the soup. It was a revelation. It wasn't just hot, it was flavorful, rich, and felt like life itself flowing back into him. He drank it down faster than he intended, a faint blush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. Maya chuckled softly. "Good, right? Grandma Martha says you can't fight the darkness on an empty stomach." She gestured with her head towards the soup kitchen. "We're closing up soon, but there's probably some bread left if you want it. No charge." "Why?" The question slipped out before he could stop it. "Why are you being so nice?" Maya's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of profound, weary understanding. "Because this city takes enough from people. It doesn't need my help to do it. Someone's gotta be on the other side of the scale, right?" Pushing back. "Even if it's just with a cup of soup." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was so simple, so pure. It was the core of heroism, stripped of all the costumes, rankings, and flashy powers. Pushing back against the darkness. It was what he had been trying to do, in his own fumbling, violent way. But she was doing it with kindness. With hope. He followed her inside. The small kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of baked bread and simmering vegetables. An elderly woman with kind, wrinkled eyes, her Grandma Martha, he presumed, gave him a warm smile and a thick slice of bread without a word. He sat at a small table in the corner, eating slowly, making the food last. For the first time since he'd arrived in this nightmare world, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt seen. Maya came and sat opposite him after she finished cleaning up. "So, what's your story, Izuku? Run away?" He shook his head. "It's complicated. It always is," she said with a shrug. "You don't have to tell me. But you need a place to stay that isn't a puddle. We've got a cot in the back room. It's not much, but it's dry and warm." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that it left him speechless. In a city that had shown him nothing but cynicism and fear, this girl and her grandmother were an impossible, miraculous exception. Over the next week, Martha's kitchen became his anchor. He insisted on earning his keep, helping with washing dishes, mopping floors, and carrying heavy crates of donated cans. He was ridiculously strong, a fact Maya noticed with a raised eyebrow but didn't question. He learned her story in bits and pieces. Her parents had been victims of a random act of gang violence years ago. Her grandmother had raised her, instilling in her a fierce, defiant optimism. The kitchen was their legacy, their small, defiant act of war against Gotham's apathy. Maya was sharp, funny, and relentlessly hopeful. She saw the good in him, the desperate need to help that radiated from him like a physical force. She didn't know he was a hero from another world, but she saw the hero in his soul. "You've got that look, you know," she told him one evening as they were locking up. "What look?" he asked, confused. "The look of someone who wants to carry the whole world on his shoulders," she said, her expression serious. "I see it in the bats sometimes, in the pictures. This city, it'll crush you if you try to do that alone." Her words were a sobering reminder of his reality. But being with her, working in the kitchen, seeing the grateful faces of the people they fed, it started to rekindle something in him. A flicker of the old Deku. The boy who believed in saving everyone. Maya and her grandmother weren't just people he was protecting, they were a symbol. They were proof that even in the deepest, most suffocating darkness, a light could still shine. Protecting their small corner of the world, their defiant beacon of hope, became his new mission. He would be the shield for their light. He would keep them safe. He still went out at night, a swift, unseen guardian. But now he had a purpose. He wasn't just fighting the darkness, he was protecting the light. He started to believe, just a little, that he could be a hero here after all. He could find a way to honor All Might's legacy, even in a city that had never heard his name. He had a purpose. He had a friend. For the first time in a long time, Izuku Midoriya had hope. And in a city like Gotham, hope was the most dangerous thing you could possibly possess. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Izuku Midoriya felt the ghost of a genuine smile touch his lips. The warmth in the small kitchen was a stark contrast to the perpetual damp chill of Gotham, a pocket of defiance against the city's oppressive gloom. He was stacking heavy bags of potatoes in the pantry, a task that would have taken two strong men a considerable effort, but which he handled with the ease of someone carrying groceries. "All right, show off, that's the last of them," Maya said, leaning against the doorframe with a playful smirk. She held 2 mugs of steaming tea, her dark curls escaping her beanie in a chaotic halo. "You keep this up, I'm going to start thinking you've got some kind of superpower." Izuku froze for a fraction of a second, the heavy bag held aloft in one hand. He quickly placed it on the stack and turned, forcing a casual laugh. "Just grew up doing a lot of heavy lifting." It was a weak lie, but Maya didn't press. She never did. She had an innate ability to see the boundaries people drew around themselves and the grace to not cross them. She handed him a mug, their fingers brushing for a moment. The simple human contact sent a jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the tea. "Well, whatever it is, Grandma's grateful," she said, her eyes soft. "We haven't had a pantry this organized since, well, ever." They settled at their usual small table in the corner, the quiet hum of the kitchen's old refrigerator a comforting backdrop. The dinner rush was over, the last of the city's hungry and haunted having been fed and sent back into the night. It was in these quiet moments that Izuku felt a semblance of peace. The work was simple, honest. He wasn't a hero battling reality-warping villains. He was just Izuku, a boy helping 2 kind women feed their community. It was grounding. "You were fast tonight," Maya noted, taking a sip of her tea. "Heard about that mess over on Grand Avenue. Some of Penguin's goons trying to shake down Mr. Delancey's electronics shop." Izuku focused on his mug. "I was in the neighborhood." "You're always in the neighborhood when things go bad, aren't you?" she said, her voice gentle, not accusatory. "The green ghost, they're starting to call you on the street." A flash of green light, a gust of wind, and suddenly the bad guys are tied up in a neat little pile. "You're careful." "But Izuku, this city chews up careful people." "I have to try," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was the core of his being, the answer to every question of why. "I can't just stand by." Maya sighed, a sound of weary understanding. "I know. That's what I like about you. You've got that fire. The kind this city tries so hard to extinguish. She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. Just promise me you'll be safe. You're one of the good things in this place. I don't want to see Gotham break you. Her concern was a physical weight, a warmth in his chest. In this world of strangers, she had become his friend, his anchor. She and her grandmother were the living, breathing proof that there was something here worth fighting for, something beyond just stopping the violence. There was goodness, kindness, and it had to be shielded. I promise, Maya, he said, looking her in the eyes. I'll be safe. It was a promise he was a fool to make. In a dilapidated funhouse on the abandoned amusement mile pier, laughter echoed off peeling paint and the distorted reflections of grinning clowns. The laughter was high-pitched, manic, and utterly without joy. It belonged to a man with skin the color of bleached bone, hair like toxic waste, and a smile carved into a permanent, blood-red rictus. The Joker sat perched atop a rusted-out carousel horse, idly polishing a long-barreled revolver with a silk handkerchief. Below him, a handful of his thugs stood nervously, their usual brutish confidence eroded by their boss's unpredictable glee. A small, flickering television on a cart was playing a grainy cell phone video from a local news site. It showed a blurry green streak tearing through a group of armed robbers. Oh, look at him go! The Joker cackled, pointing a long, white finger at the screen. Zip! Zap! Pow! Like a little green jumping bean with a hero complex. He's so earnest, he sighed, a theatrical sound of pure delight. It's been so long since we've had a new toy, boys. Batsy's gotten so predictable. Brood, brood, punch, vanish. It's the same old song and dance. I know all the steps. It's boring. He hopped off the horse, his movements unnervingly fluid, like a broken puppet brought to life. He paced in front of his men, his tattered purple suit swishing around his ankles. But this one. He tapped a thoughtful finger against his chin. This one is different. He's not a creature of the night. He's a blazing little firefly in the dark. He announces himself. He tries to talk them down. He pulls his punches. The Joker's eyes widened, a crazed fire dancing in their depths. He doesn't want to save the city. He wants to save everyone in it. And that, oh, that is a beautiful, beautiful flaw. One of the thugs, a beefy man named Gordo, shifted his weight. So, what's the plan, boss? You want us to set a trap? Snatch him? The Joker stopped pacing and whirled around to face Gordo, his smile stretching impossibly wide. A trap? Gordo, you wound me. So crude. So unimaginative. Traps are for rats and bats. This is a debut, a coming-out party. We don't need to trap him. We need to teach him. He sauntered over to a large map of Gotham City pinned to a corkboard, covered in frantic scrawls and coffee stains. He picked up a red dart, and held it poised over the map. Batman understands the punchline of Gotham, that it's all a big, meaningless joke. That's why he can't ever truly win. He's stuck in the setup. The Joker mused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. This little spark, though, he still believes in the story. He thinks there's a moral at the end. We need to show him the real ending, the one where the hero makes a choice, saves the day, and in doing so, dooms the one thing he loves most. His eyes scanned the map, passing over banks, museums, and political landmarks. His gaze settled on the industrial district, then darted to the Narrows. A slow, chillingly brilliant idea began to bloom in the toxic soil of his mind. You see, the trick isn't to break his body. Anyone can do that, he said, his voice filled with the passion of an artist describing his magnum opus. The trick is to break his spirit, to take his greatest virtue, his absolute, unwavering belief that he can save everyone, and turn it into the very weapon that destroys him. He giggled, a sound like glass breaking. And for that, you need the perfect stage. A classic dilemma. He threw the dart. It spun through the air and embedded itself in the map with a soft thwump. It landed squarely on the iconic logo of AC Chemicals. And the perfect, most personal, little consequence. He took a second dart, a black one this time, and threw it without looking. It landed in the heart of the Narrows, just a few blocks from a small, hand-painted sign that read, "Martha's Kitchen, Johnny," the Joker said, turning to a wiry thug with a nervous twitch. "Get the boys together. We're putting on a show. And make sure the hostages at the plant look extra pathetic. Our little green friend loves a damsel in distress." The Joker clapped his hands together, his laughter echoing through the decaying funhouse once more. It was time to give Gotham's newest hero a proper welcome. It was time for the lesson to begin. Izuku was wiping down the last of the counters when the news report broke. A small television in the corner of the kitchen, usually tuned to a cooking channel, was now showing a live feed. A frantic reporter stood in front of the massive, looming structure of AC Chemicals, rain slicking her jacket. "Details are still coming in, but sources say that a group of armed men, believed to be affiliated with the Joker, have taken over the main processing plant. They are reportedly holding a dozen employees hostage and are threatening to release a cloud of deadly neurotoxin over the city if their demands are not met." Izuku's blood ran cold. The Joker. The one name in this city that represented pure, unpredictable chaos. He had read the files, the articles. He knew what the man was capable of. Maya and her grandmother were watching, their faces pale with fear. "Not again," Martha whispered, her hand going to her heart. "What are their demands?" Maya asked the television, as if it could answer. "The Joker's demands are unusual," the reporter continued, her voice strained. "He hasn't asked for money or power. He has issued a challenge. He wants Gotham's newest mystery vigilante, the so-called Green Ghost, to come to AC Chemicals and stop him. Alone, the world seemed to narrow to the flickering screen. It was a trap. An obvious, blatant trap. His mind, honed by years of Aizawa's ruthless training and All Might's guidance, screamed it at him. This was a classic villain maneuver, designed to isolate the hero and control the battlefield. But then the camera panned to a grainy shot of the hostages, huddled together on a catwalk, men in clown masks brandishing automatic weapons over them. They looked terrified. One of them, a young woman, was openly weeping, and Izuku's heroic instinct, the foundational pillar of his entire existence, overrode everything else. "There are people in danger. They need a hero. I have to go," he said, his voice low and firm. Maya grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with panic. "Izuku, no! It's the Joker! It's a trick! He's insane! This is what Batman does, not you." "They're asking for me, Maya," he replied, his gaze locked on the screen. He saw not a strategic problem, but a moral absolute. People were going to die if he did nothing. "He wants me, so he'll be focused on me. It gives the police and Batman a chance to work. I can be a diversion. I can save those people." His logic was straight out of the UA textbook. Draw the villain's attention. Control the situation. Minimize civilian casualties. It was a sound strategy in a world where villains had egos and heroes were symbols. He was catastrophically, fatally wrong about which world he was in. "Please," she begged, her grip tightening. "Don't go. It's not your fight." He looked at her then, at her terrified, pleading face. And he gave her the most reassuring smile he could muster, a pale imitation of All Might's, but filled with all the sincerity he possessed. "It is," he said softly. "It's always my fight." He gently removed her hand from his arm. "Lock the doors after I leave. Don't open them for anyone. I'll be back. I promise." He slipped into the pantry where he kept his costume hidden. It was still tattered, still battle-scarred, but as he pulled on the familiar green fabric, he felt the familiar thrum of purpose. One for all ignited beneath his skin, a comforting warmth. He was Deku, the ninth wielder of One for All. He saved people. That was his job. With a final, determined glance back at Maya's worried face, he slipped out the back door and into the Gotham night. He vaulted to the nearest rooftop, the rain instantly plastering his cowl to his head. He didn't look back. He never saw the black van with a crude, smiling face spray-painted on its side pull up to the corner opposite the kitchen, its headlights dark. AC Chemicals was an industrial nightmare, a maze of pipes, catwalks, and massive vats that churned with bubbling, ominously colored liquids. The air was thick with the acrid smell of chemicals, a scent that burned the back of his throat. He perched on a silo overlooking the main processing facility, his analytical mind dissecting the situation. 12 hostages, at least 10 gunmen visible. The gunmen are positioned in a wide perimeter around the hostages, no clear bunching. They're using the hostages as human shields. Classic, but their attention seems divided. They're looking outward, expecting an assault. They're not focused on the objective. It was sloppy. Too sloppy for a villain of the Joker's reputation. Danger sense was a low, persistent hum in his skull, a sign of general threat but no specific, immediate danger. It was all part of the trap. He knew it. But the hostages were real. Their fear was real. He had to act. His plan was simple. Speed and shock. He wouldn't give them time to react, to harm the hostages. He would be a force of nature, a whirlwind of green lightning that would neutralize the threat before they could even process his arrival. He broadcasted his intentions, a tactic to focus all eyes on him. "Joker!" he roared, his voice amplified by a 5% flick of air, making it boom across the chemical plant. "I'm here! Let the people go! Your fight is with me!" On a high catwalk, a figure in a purple suit turned slowly. The Joker's smile was a slash of red in the sickly yellow light of the plant. He gave an exaggerated, theatrical bow. "Bravo! Bravo!" The villain's voice echoed, tinny and manic over the plant's PA system. "He's here! Punctual, and so dramatic! I like him! Give the boy a round of applause!" The gunmen half-heartedly clapped, their movements sluggish and disinterested. It was all wrong. This felt less like a tense standoff and more like a poorly rehearsed play. But there was no more time for analysis. The Joker raised a pistol and fired it at the ceiling. "All right, hero! The clock is ticking! Save your precious citizens! Come and get me!" Deku didn't hesitate. He pushed off the silo, F.A. Jean and a 45% blast from One for All launching him through the air like a cannonball. He was a green comet in the rain-swept night. He landed on the main platform with a thunderous crash that buckled the steel plating beneath his feet. "It is over!" he declared, falling back on the familiar, comforting script of heroism. The gunman opened fire. Automatic weapon fire erupted, a deafening cacophony in the enclosed space. For them, it was a terrifying wall of lead. For Deku, it was a simple equation of trajectory and velocity. He moved, a fluid dance of impossible speed. Bullets zipped through the space where he'd been a microsecond before. He used shoot style, his iron-soled boots deflecting stray rounds, the impacts sending sparks flying into the air. Black-whip tendrils erupted from his arms, dark, semi-sentient ribbons of energy. They were not the wild, untamed things they had once been. Now they were extensions of his will, precise and lethally efficient. One tendril wrapped around a rifle, yanking it away. Another snaked around a gunman's ankles, hoisting him upside down. In seconds he disarmed half of them without throwing a single punch. The remaining thugs, seeing their bullets were useless, charged. It was a foolish, fatal mistake. Deku met them head-on. A St. Louis smash at 20% sent a gale-force wind that knocked 3 of them off their feet. A quick, precise chop to the neck of another. A leg sweep that sent 2 more crashing into a pile. It was over in under a minute. 10 gunmen, neutralized, unconscious, and utterly defeated. He stood panting in the center of the platform, the green lightning of One for All crackling around him. He had done it. He had saved them. He turned to the hostages, a triumphant, reassuring smile on his face. "It's all right now. Your essay." He stopped. The hostages weren't crying with relief. They weren't rushing to thank him. They were staring at him, and they weren't scared. They were bored. One of them, the young woman who had been weeping so convincingly, was now checking her makeup in a small compact mirror. A cold, heavy stone dropped into the pit of his stomach. "Not bad, kid," one of the hostages said, getting to his feet and stretching. "Really top-notch stuff. The speed, the light show." The other hostages started getting up, dusting themselves off. They weren't civilians. They were thugs, actors in a cheap play, and he was the fool who had fallen for it. The Joker's slow, mocking applause echoed from the catwalk above. "Oh, that was just marvelous! The power! The conviction! The classic hero entrance. A masterpiece of the genre. Truly, Deku stared up at him, his mind struggling to process the deception. Where are the real hostages? He demanded, his voice tight with a rising dread. Hostages? My dear boy, you're missing the point, the Joker cackled. This wasn't the performance. This was just the overture. The main event, the real punchline, is happening right now. The Joker pulled a small flip phone from his pocket and tossed it down to Deku. I believe this is for you. With trembling hands, Deku picked up the phone. On the screen was a live video feed. It was a shaky, handheld shot of a familiar storefront. Martha's kitchen. The front window was shattered. Masked men were dragging furniture out into the street, smashing it. His heart stopped. You see? The Joker's voice purred from above, a venomous whisper that cut through the roaring in Izuku's ears. I did a little research on our new hero. Found out he had a soft spot, a little beacon of hope he was protecting in the Narrows. And I thought to myself, what's the best way to teach a boy who thinks he can save everyone a lesson? Well, you force him to choose. The video feed zoomed in. Maya was standing in the doorway of her ruined kitchen, her face a mask of defiant fury. She was standing between the goons and her grandmother. You were so focused on saving a dozen strangers you'd never met. The Joker's voice continued, dripping with mock pity. That you completely forgot to protect the one person who actually mattered to you. A man in a clown mask on the video feed raised a crowbar. No! The scream was ripped from Izuku's soul. It was a sound of pure, primal anguish. He forgot the Joker. He forgot the trap. He forgot everything but Maya's face. He pushed one for all to a level he hadn't touched since the war. The world didn't just slow down, it froze. He launched himself from the chemical plant, shattering a reinforced window as he exited. He was a streak of desperate, frantic green light, a living missile aimed at the heart of the Narrows. The city lights blurred into streaks of neon. The rain felt like needles against his face. The roar of the wind was deafening, but it couldn't drown out the frantic, terrified pounding of his own heart. Faster. Faster. I have to be faster. He pushed the power higher. 60%. 70%. His muscles screamed, threatening to tear themselves from the bone. The pain was irrelevant. Danger sense was no longer a hum. It was a piercing, agonizing shriek, a sensory overload that confirmed his worst fears. Please be okay. Please be okay. Please, please, please. He saw the street. He saw the ruined storefront. He saw the black van speeding away down the block. He landed in the middle of the street, the asphalt cracking under the force of his arrival. The scene was one of utter devastation. The windows were shattered, the door torn from its hinges. The hand-painted sign was split in two. Inside, tables were overturned, chairs smashed to pieces, and the floor was littered with shattered plates and spilled food. It smelled of smoke and despair. He saw Martha first. She was on her knees on the rain-slicked sidewalk, cradling a figure in her arms. She was rocking back and forth, a low, keening wail of pure grief escaping her lips. Izuku's legs felt like lead. He took one step, then another, his body moving through a thick, syrupy miasma of dread. He knew what he was going to see. But knowing didn't prepare him. It was Maya. She was lying in her grandmother's lap, her dark, curly hair matted with rain and blood. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across the front of her simple apron. Her breathing was shallow, a faint, rattling sound. Her sharp, intelligent eyes were glazed with pain, but they focused on him as he approached. Izuku, she whispered, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of her mouth. He fell to his knees beside her, his mind a complete, roaring blank. Maya. I'm here. It's okay. I'm here now. He choked out, the words tasting like ash. He reached out, his hand hovering over her wound, as if the sheer force of his will could stitch it closed. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. She reached up, her hand weak, and touched his cheek. Her fingers were cold. "'S not your fault," she gasped, each word an immense effort. You tried." Her eyes fluttered. Her hand fell from his face. The rattling sound in her chest stopped, and she was gone. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a void, a vacuum that sucked all the sound, all the air, all the life from the world. Izuku stared at her still form, at her empty eyes reflecting the grim, uncaring Gotham sky. You tried. The words were not an absolution. They were a condemnation. He had tried. He had used his power, his speed, his training. He had followed the heroic creed that had been beaten into him since he was a child. He had tried to be a symbol. He had tried to save everyone, and he had failed. His philosophy, the very foundation of his being, had not just been challenged, it had been executed in a filthy Gotham alley. His belief in the inherent goodness of his actions, in the power of a hero's smile, in the absolute morality of saving people, it was all a lie. A childish fairy tale he had told himself. In this city, his brand of heroism wasn't just ineffective, it was a liability. A fatal one. Something inside him didn't just break. It atomized. The grief came first, a tidal wave that drowned him. It was a physical force, so powerful it buckled his spine. A strangled sob escaped his lips. Then came the rage, a white-hot, volcanic fury directed not at the Joker, not at the thugs, but at himself. At his own weakness. His own stupidity. His own naive, pathetic idealism. He was a fraud. A failure. A child playing dress-up in a city of monsters. All Might's power, the sacred torch passed down through generations, and he had used it to get a little girl killed. He threw his head back and screamed. It was not a human sound. It was the shriek of a soul being torn in two. And as he screamed, one for all, no longer constrained by his will or his heroic ideals, answered. It erupted from him not as controlled green lightning, but as a raw, untamed cataclysm of power. The air pressure dropped violently. A shockwave of pure force exploded outward from his body. The windows of the buildings for 3 blocks in every direction shattered simultaneously, raining glass down onto the streets. The ground beneath him cracked, spiderwebbing out from where he knelt. A low, grinding tremor shook the foundations of the Narrows, a localized earthquake born of a single boy's agony. The green energy flared around him, wild and destructive, scorching the asphalt and making the very air vibrate. The vestiges within him, the 8 souls of heroes past, were silent. They could offer no comfort, no guidance. They could only bear witness to the breaking of the 9th. He knelt there in the rain, amidst the ruins of the one good thing he had found in this world, cradling the body of his dead friend. The power receded, leaving him empty and hollow. The name Deku, the hero who could do it, the boy who always saved the day, died in that alley. All that was left was Izuku Midoriya, a boy who had learned Gotham's most important lesson: you can't save everyone. And trying will only destroy the ones you love. The fire in him was not extinguished. It was warped, twisted, and reforged in the crucible of his failure into something colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. The hero was dead. What would rise from his ashes had yet to be seen. The ghost of Izuku Midoriya haunted the rooftops of Gotham. It had been 3 weeks since the world had ended in a rain-soaked alley. 3 weeks since Maya's last, rattling breath had stolen the last of his light. The raw, volcanic agony of that night had cooled, not into peace, but into a hard, cold, and heavy substance that now filled the spaces in his soul where hope used to live. Grief was no longer a wave that threatened to drown him. It was the ocean in which he now swam, its crushing pressure a constant, familiar companion. He didn't cry anymore. The capacity for tears seemed to have been burned out of him in that first, cataclysmic scream. Now, there was only a profound, hollow numbness. He moved through the city not as a hero, but as a specter, an unseen observer bearing witness to the city's endless, grinding cycle of decay. The name Deku was a shard of glass in his memory. It belonged to a foolish, naive boy from another world. A boy who smiled, who preached about saving everyone, a boy who got his friend killed. That boy was dead, buried in an unmarked grave of failure and regret. Izuku Midoriya was merely the shell he left behind. From his perch on the ledge of a grimy tenement building, he watched the city breathe its foul, corrupt air. He saw it all. He saw a drug deal go down on a corner, the participants no older than he was. He saw a pimp slap one of his girls for holding back a few dollars. He saw a mother, gaunt and desperate, teaching her young son how to pick a pocket. And he did nothing. The old Izuku, the hero Deku, would have been down there in a flash of green lightning. He would have stopped them, lectured them, tried to show them a better way. The new Izuku simply watched, his mind a cold, analytical engine. He saw these acts not as individual crimes, but as symptoms of a terminal disease. Stopping one mother was like treating a single cancerous cell with a band-aid. The tumor of Gotham would remain, malignant and metastasizing. He had started watching the bat too. He was a creature of impossible stealth and precision. Izuku would see the dark shape descend, a flurry of motion, and then 2 or 3 criminals would be left groaning and bound for the police. The bat would be gone before the first siren wailed. It was efficient. It was intimidating. And it was utterly, completely pointless. Izuku had spent a week tracking the arrest records of the common thugs Batman apprehended. The results were a bitter, cynical joke. More than half were back on the streets within 72 hours. Overcrowded prisons, corrupt judges, plea bargains, witnesses too terrified to testify. Batman wasn't cleaning up the city. He was a janitor, endlessly mopping a floor with a perpetually overflowing leak. He was managing the chaos, not ending it. His sacred code, his refusal to kill, wasn't a mark of moral superiority. It was a revolving door. He would put the Joker in Arkham, and the Joker would get out and kill another Maya. And another. And another. The system was broken, and Batman, for all his genius and might, was a willing participant in its farce. A sudden, violent crack of thunder overhead jolted him from his reverie. The perpetually drizzling sky finally broke, unleashing a torrential downpour. Cold, heavy drops hammered against his thin, grimy jacket, soaking him to the bone in seconds. He needed shelter. Not the leaky alcove he'd been using, but something solid, something that could shield him from a storm that seemed to mirror the one raging inside him. His eyes fell on a derelict apartment building across the street. The Park Row Apartments, a faded sign read, though the name was an insult to both parks and apartments. It was a condemned monolith, a husk of a building in the heart of Crime Alley, the city's festering wound. The windows were boarded up or shattered, the facade like a rotted skull. It was perfect. No one would look for him there. He crossed the street, a shadow among shadows, and slipped through a broken window on the ground floor. The air inside was thick with the smell of mildew, rot, and forgotten lives. He moved through the decaying halls, his light footsteps making no sound on the debris-strewn floor. He ascended the stairs, seeking higher ground, a place where he could feel something other than trapped. He found a room on the top floor that was slightly less decrepit than the others. A large portion of the roof had caved in, but one corner remained blessedly dry. He slumped to the floor, his back against the peeling, damp wallpaper, and hugged his knees to his chest, shivering. The thunder rattled the building's very foundations. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to retreat into the cold, quiet numbness. As the building shuddered from a particularly violent clap of thunder, he instinctively braced himself against the wall. Under the pressure of his hand, something gave. Not the whole wall, but a section of it. A faint, hollow sound. His eyes snapped open. The analytical part of his brain, the part that had logged thousands of hours dissecting hero techniques and support gear, took over. He pushed again, tracing the outline of the loose section with his fingers. It wasn't rot. It was a panel, cleverly disguised. He ran his hand along the edge and his fingers brushed against a tiny, almost invisible indentation. A release mechanism. He pressed it. With a faint hiss of hydraulics, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. The air that wafted out was cool, dry, and smelled faintly of gun oil and old leather. It was a hidden room. A panic room, or something else. Curiosity, the first real emotion he'd felt in weeks besides the dull ache of grief, compelled him forward. He slipped through the opening into the darkness. The doors swung shut behind him with a solid, definitive thump, plunging him into absolute blackness. For a moment, panic flared, but he suppressed it. He ran his hand along the interior wall until he found a switch. He flipped it. A series of low-voltage LED strips flickered to life, casting a sterile, white glow over the space. He wasn't in a panic room. He was in an armory. A safe house. It was a small, brutally functional space. A single cot was folded against one wall. A small workstation was covered in dismantled electronics, wires, and soldering tools. A mini-fridge hummed quietly in the corner. But it was the other walls that held his attention. They were lined with weapons. Handguns of various calibers were mounted in neat rows. A combat shotgun and an assault rifle were locked in a vertical rack. Knives of every conceivable shape and size were laid out on a magnetic board. Grenades, flashbangs, smoke, and what looked like high explosive, were nestled in foam cutouts. This wasn't a place of safety. It was a place of war. On the floor, next to the cot, was a large, military-style duffel bag. It was unzipped, its contents partially spilling out. He knelt beside it. Inside was a worn, brown leather jacket with reinforced padding, a set of dark, tactical pants, and a Kevlar vest. The vest was a patchwork of repairs, the marks of knives and bullets still faintly visible, a testament to a violent history. And then he saw it, nestled amidst the folds of the jacket. He reached in and lifted it out. It was heavy, solid. A full-face helmet, expertly crafted from some kind of polymer composite. It was smooth, featureless, save for two stark, white, screen-like eyes. And it was a deep, visceral, blood red. He knew what it was. He had seen it in the articles, the grainy photos. This was the helmet of the Red Hood. This was Jason Todd's safe house. A chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside traced a path down his spine. He was standing in the den of one of Gotham's most violent and controversial figures. A man who was once a hero, a Robin, before the Joker had. Izuku's breath hitched. The Joker. The thread that connected this dead hero to his own living tragedy. His gaze fell upon a small, metal footlocker tucked under the workstation. It was unlocked. He hesitated for only a moment before opening it. It wasn't filled with more weapons. It was filled with files, dozens and dozens of manila folders, crammed in with no sense of organization. He pulled one out at random. The label read Penguin Arms Shipment 10/12. Inside were surveillance photos, shipping manifests, and blueprints of the Gotham docks. Scrawled in the margins, in an angry, aggressive script, were notes. Cobblepot's getting sloppy. Using the same routes. Thinks the Bat won't stoop to crippling his men. He's right. I'm not the Bat. He picked up another file. Black Mask extortion rings. It was filled with profiles of enforcers, lists of terrorized shop owners, and maps of territory. One photo, a crime scene shot, showed a family of 4 executed in their home. Below it, the same jagged handwriting burned with a cold fury. GCPD ruled it a robbery gone wrong. Bullshit. This was a message from Sionis. Told the old man to pay up. He didn't. Now he and his family are dead. Batman will put Sionis as triggerman in Blackgate. He'll be out in 5 years. The family is in the ground forever. Some justice. Izuku's heart hammered in his chest. He was reading a diary of righteous, unbound rage. This wasn't the work of a mindless killer. It was the meticulous, obsessive work of a man who had seen the system fail, over and over again, and had decided to create his own. A man who had looked at the revolving door of Arkham and Blackgate, and decided to weld it shut. He dug deeper, his hands moving with a feverish intensity. He saw files on Two-Face, Scarecrow, Riddler. Every file told the same story, a city bleeding out, a system that was a mockery of justice, and a relentless, brutal anger at the futility of it all. Jason Todd wasn't just punishing criminals, he was performing a surgery, cutting out the cancerous tumors that men like Batman were content to merely contain. Then he found the file he was subconsciously looking for. It was thicker than the others, the folder worn and soft at the edges from being handled so many times. There was only one word on the tab, scrawled with so much pressure that it was carved into the paper. Joker. He opened it. It was chaos. There were no neat reports, no structured analysis. It was a collage of madness. News clippings of the Joker's atrocities. A photo of a GCPD officer the Joker had forced to kill his own partner. A list of known associates, most of them crossed out with brutal, red X's. And in the center of it all, a single, haunting photograph. It was a picture of a Robin costume, displayed in a glass case in the Batcave. It was tattered, torn, and stained. Jason's costume, his shroud, and the notes. The notes were different. They weren't cold and analytical. They were pure, unadulterated pain. He's still out there. He's still laughing. He took everything from me, and Bruce lets him keep laughing. Sometimes I can still feel the crowbar. I wake up swinging. How many more have to die? How many more kids does he have to break before Bruce understands? This isn't a game. It's a plague. And you don't reason with a plague. You burn it out. Izuku dropped the file, his hands shaking. He saw it all. He saw the boy, beaten and broken in a warehouse. He saw the rage of his resurrection. He saw the pain of being replaced, of being a ghost in his own life. He saw the utter, soul-crushing frustration of watching the monster who murdered him continue his reign of terror, protected by the very man who was supposed to be his father. He didn't see a villain. He didn't see a killer. He saw a mirror. He saw his own pain, his own rage, his own devastating failure reflected in Jason Todd's bloody crusade. The Joker had taken Jason's life. And in a different, more insidious way, the Joker had taken his, too. He had murdered the hero Deku and left Izuku to rot in the ruins. Jason's rage was his own. Jason's disillusionment was his own. Jason's desperate, screaming need for a justice that was final, a justice that mattered, was his own. He stood up and walked back to the helmet, picking it up again. He stared into its blank, impassive face. It was a symbol of fear, of brutality, of a line crossed. But it was also a symbol of consequence. In a city where actions had no meaning, where murderers were given therapy and sent back out to kill again, the Red Hood was a walking, breathing consequence. He was the final answer to a question Batman was too afraid to ask. A choice crystallized in the cold, quiet core of his being. Not a choice born of hope or idealism, but of bitter, pragmatic clarity. His way had failed. Batman's way was failing. It was time for a third option. He wouldn't be a hero. Heroism was a lie that got people killed. He would be a surgeon. He would cut the cancer out of this city, piece by bloody piece. He would bring a reckoning, but a line still existed within him, a final, faint echo of the boy he used to be. The ghosts of his predecessors, the spirit of all might, the memory of his mother's tearful pride. He couldn't kill. It was a fundamental part of his code, buried too deep to excavate, even by his grief. Killing made him no better than the villains. It made him a monster. But mercy? Mercy was a privilege. And the scum of this city had not earned it. He walked to the workstation, his movements now filled with a purpose he hadn't felt since Maya's death. He picked up one of the custom pistols, a heavy, intimidating piece of hardware. He field-stripped it with a surprising, innate competence, the part of him that loved tinkering with support gear taking over. He saw how it worked, the genius in its design. And he saw how he could change it. He found what he was looking for in a box of spare parts. Specialized rubber slugs, high-density polymer rounds designed for riot control. He also found taser cartridges and beanbag rounds. Non-lethal. But at the velocity these guns could fire them, non-lethal was a relative term. A rubber slug fired with this much force could break bones, shatter kneecaps, and inflict a world of agonizing, unforgettable pain without stopping a heart. It was the perfect compromise. He could adopt the fear, the brutality, the methods of the Red Hood, but filter them through his own unbreakable rule. He would not take a life. But he would shatter limbs. He would cripple operations. He would dismantle criminal empires with overwhelming, terrifying, and non-lethal force. He would be the fear that criminals deserved, a terror more potent than Batman because his punishment wasn't a trip to a revolving door prison. His punishment was visceral, immediate, and permanent. He spent the next hour modifying the weapons, loading the magazines with his chosen ammunition. He found a grappling gun, more advanced than the one he was used to, and holsters for the pistols that strapped to his thighs. He pulled on the Kevlar vest, the tactical pants. They were a near-perfect fit. He slipped the worn leather jacket over the top. It felt like a second skin, a mantle of purpose. He stood before a small, cracked mirror on the wall, looking at the stranger staring back at him. The gaunt face, the haunted eyes that held no light, the hard set of his jaw. This was who he was now. He picked up the helmet. The rain had stopped, and the first, gray hints of a Gotham dawn were filtering through the cracks in the boarded windows. A new day. A new beginning. He raised the helmet, the smooth, red surface a promise of the violence to come. The name Deku was a memory of failure. You tried. Maya's last words echoed in his mind, but they were no longer a condemnation. They were a mission statement. He had tried to be a hero. He had tried to save them with a smile. Now, he would try something else. He placed the helmet over his head. There was a soft hiss as it sealed, the world outside tinting a dark, bloody red through the optical lenses. A tactical HUD flickered to life, displaying his biometrics and an ambient temperature reading. His breathing was loud in the enclosed space, a steady, rhythmic sound. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the ghost of a hero. He was a consequence. He was a reckoning. He was the Red Hood. The Gotham night had 1,000 voices. The distant, mournful wail of sirens, the hiss of tires on perpetually wet streets, the low, guttural rumble of the city's forgotten underbelly. Tonight, a new voice was being added to the choir. It was a whisper, a rumor passed in hushed, terrified tones in dive bars and back alleys. A whisper of a ghost in a red helmet. At the Otisburg docks, the air was thick with the stench of brine, dead fish, and diesel fuel. Under the jaundiced glare of industrial floodlights, a dozen of Oswald Cobblepot's men were overseeing the unloading of a long, unassuming shipping container. To any casual observer, it was a shipment of frozen seafood. But the men with shotguns and automatic rifles knew better. Nestled between crates of mackerel were long, wooden boxes stamped with Cyrillic lettering, each one holding a military-grade assault rifle. It was business as usual in Penguin's Gotham. Frankie, the bull Carbone, watched from the door of the warehouse, a cheap cigarillo dangling from his lips. He was a mountain of a man, built by years of lifting crates and breaking legs. He was bored. This was a milk run. The Bat was busy with some new Riddler nonsense downtown, and the cops wouldn't dare come this deep into Penguin's territory without a warrant signed in triplicate, and a SWAT team. They were safe. Hurry it up! He barked at the grunts on the forklift. The boss wants these toys in the inventory before dawn. A sudden, sharp ping echoed through the cavernous warehouse. One of the high-powered floodlights showering the area in light went dark, its bulb shattered. Frankie grunted in annoyance. Hey, DeLuca! Watch where you're swinging that damn crowbar! Wasn't me, Frankie! A voice called back from the container. Another ping. A second floodlight died, plunging their work area into a deeper gloom, illuminated now only by the sickly orange glow of the warehouse's interior lights. The men stopped working, their heads turning, scanning the darkness. A nervous energy began to ripple through them. All right, who's the comedian? Frankie growled, his hand instinctively going to the handgun holstered under his arm. There was no reply. Only the sound of the lapping water and the creak of the old warehouse. Then, a new sound. A soft, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was coming from above. Someone was on the roof. Up there! One of the men yelled, pointing a shaking finger towards the rafters high above, lost in the oppressive darkness. I saw something! Frankie squinted, trying to pierce the gloom. He saw nothing. You're seeing things. Get back to work! But the feeling was undeniable. The atmosphere had shifted. The air was colder, heavier. They were being watched. Then he appeared. There was no sound, no warning. One moment, the steel beam 20 feet above the container was empty. The next, a figure was standing on it, as silent and still as one of the gargoyles that watched over the city. He was tall, clad in dark tactical gear and a worn leather jacket, but it was the helmet that stole the air from their lungs. A smooth, featureless dome of blood red, with two stark, white, unblinking eyes that seemed to glow with a cold, dead light. It was the Red Hood. Holy hell! Someone whispered. A few of the younger thugs, who only knew the stories, took a half-step back. Frankie, who had been around long enough to remember the original Hood's brand of mayhem, felt a knot of ice form in his gut. It's him! Frankie breathed. He drew his weapon. Light him up! The night erupted in a storm of automatic gunfire. A dozen rifles opened up at once, the roar of the weapons deafening in the enclosed space. A hail of bullets tore through the air, ripping into the steel beam, sending sparks flying like angry fireflies. They chewed through metal, concrete, and wood, the destructive cacophony echoing off the water. When the first clips ran dry and the firing stopped, the silence that followed was heavy and expectant. The figure was gone. "Where'd he go?" a nervous voice asked. He's gone," another replied, a note of disbelief in his tone. Frankie scanned the rafters, his heart hammering against his ribs. "No. He's not." A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness directly behind the two thugs who had spoken. It moved with an impossible, liquid grace. Before they could even turn, two dark, whip-like tendrils of pure blackness erupted from the figure's arms. They were not solid, yet they moved with a terrifying life of their own. One whip coiled around the thug's rifle, ripping it from his hands and sending it clattering across the concrete floor. The other wrapped around the second man's throat, lifting him 6 inches off the ground, choking off his scream. The Red Hood was on the ground now, having descended without a sound. He slammed the choking man into a stack of empty pallets, the sound of wood splintering and bone cracking echoing sickeningly in the sudden silence. All hell broke loose. The men opened fire again, a panicked, undisciplined spray of bullets. But they were shooting at a phantom. The Red Hood moved with a speed that defied logic. He wasn't just dodging, he was a blur, a flicker of motion at the edge of their vision. A green, crackling energy, like static electricity, seemed to dance around his form as he moved. He closed the distance to a gunman in a fraction of a second. He didn't throw a punch. He delivered a kick, a brutally precise axe kick to the man's shoulder. The sound was not a thud, but a wet, heavy crack. The man screamed, a high, piercing sound of pure agony as his collarbone and shoulder shattered, his arm hanging at an unnatural angle. The Red Hood was already moving to the next target. He flowed through their ranks like a force of nature. It wasn't a fight, it was a harvest. His movements were a terrifying ballet of bone-breaking efficiency. He would use the back of his hand to shatter a man's nose, the heel of his boot to destroy a kneecap, a simple, open-palm strike to the chest that sent a man flying backward 10 feet, his ribs audibly snapping. Black Whip was his psychological weapon. The dark tendrils were everywhere, disarming men with contemptuous ease, and snaring their legs to send them crashing to the ground, or hoisting them into the air only to drop them onto the hard concrete below. They were like living shadows, a manifestation of the fear he embodied. Frankie watched in horror as his crew was dismantled with a surgeon's brutal precision. This wasn't the old Red Hood. Jason Todd was a brawler, a force of rage. He was fast and deadly, but he was human. This thing was something else. It moved too fast, it hit too hard. The impacts of its blows sounded like car crashes. He raised his pistol, his hand shaking. He aimed for the center of the red helmet and fired. The Hood's head snapped to the side as the bullet ricocheted off the helmet with a high-pitched whine. He paused, his white, unblinking eyes fixing on Frankie. In that moment of utter stillness, Frankie felt a cold that sank deeper than the grave. It was the cold of absolute, pitiless focus. The Hood raised one of his own pistols. Frankie flinched, bracing for the end. But instead of a deafening bang, there was a heavy, wet thwump. Something hit him in the thigh like a sledgehammer. The pain was immediate, blinding. He looked down and saw his leg bend at an angle it wasn't supposed to. His femur was shattered. He collapsed, screaming. The last conscious thug, a young kid named Jimmy, threw his empty rifle down and made a run for it. He scrambled for the warehouse exit, his mind screaming for him to get away. He was almost there when a black tendril shot out from across the room, wrapping around his ankle. He was yanked off his feet and dragged, screaming and scraping, back into the center of the room. The Red Hood stood over him, the white eyes of his helmet seeming to bore into his soul. Jimmy whimpered, tears and snot running down his face. "Please, don't kill me, please!" The Hood tilted his head, a gesture of cold curiosity. He knelt, grabbing the front of Jimmy's jacket and hauling him up. "I'm not going to kill you!" A voice growled, distorted and metallic through the helmet's modulator. It was a young voice, but layered with a cold, dead weariness that felt ancient. "You're going to take a message to Cobblepot." The voice continued, its tone flat and devoid of emotion. "Tell him this is my city now. Tell him his operations, his rackets, his entire empire, are over. Anyone who works for him, deals with him, or stands with him will answer to me. Tell him I am the new rule. And I do not show mercy." The Hood stood up, turning his back on the whimpering thug. He walked over to the open shipping container, the source of the night's conflict. He looked at the neatly stacked rifles, the tools of death and misery that fueled Gotham's endless cycle of violence. He raised his hands. The green static that had flickered around him now roared to life, coalescing into a blinding, emerald inferno. Black whip tendrils, crackling with the same energy, shot out and wrapped around the entire shipping container, biting into the corrugated steel. "Tell him this is a warning," the Red Hood said, his back still to the terrified audience of broken men. With a primal roar that was more animal than human, he pulled. The sound of groaning, screaming metal filled the night. The entire 10-ton shipping container was lifted into the air. It crumpled and buckled under the impossible strain, the thick steel walls folding in on themselves like wet cardboard. With a final, explosive exertion of power, he crushed it into a mangled, unrecognizable ball of scrap metal, the priceless shipment of weapons within reduced to splinters and twisted steel. He let the wreckage drop. It hit the ground with a deafening, earth-shaking crash that sent tremors through the entire dock. Then, as silently as he had arrived, he was gone, melting back into the shadows, leaving behind a scene of absolute devastation, a dozen broken men, and a message that would soon spread through Gotham's underworld like a plague. The whispers had been wrong. This wasn't a ghost. It was a monster. The clock tower. Barbara Gordon stared at the screen, her brow furrowed in a mixture of disbelief and deep, professional concern. On one monitor, a live feed from a GCPD patrol car's dashcam showed the chaotic aftermath at the Otisburg docks. On another, she had the preliminary incident report, flagged for extreme violence and suspected metahuman involvement. On her main display, a piece of security footage from a camera half a mile away was looping. It was grainy, shot from a terrible angle, but it was enough. It showed a dark figure launching itself from a rooftop near the docks, clearing a distance that would have made an Olympic longjumper weep, before disappearing from view. A few minutes later, the same figure reappeared, moving in the opposite direction at a speed that made the playback software stutter. She ran a velocity calculation. The numbers that came back were impossible. "No human can move that fast," she murmured, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She pulled up the file for Jason Todd. Height, weight, known physical limits, psychological profile. She cross-referenced it with the reports from the warehouse. The survivors, the ones who were coherent enough to speak between bouts of pain-induced screaming, all had similar stories. He moved like a blur. He hit like a freight train. He had black, living whips that came from his arms. He crushed a 10-ton shipping container with his bare hands. "This isn't Jason," she said, her voice firm. Jason was strong, a peak-level human conditioned by the League of Assassins and whatever the Lazarus Pit had done to him. But he was flesh and blood. He couldn't crush a shipping container. He couldn't move faster than a camera's shutter speed. He didn't have black, living whips. She isolated the audio from an officer's bodycam, filtering out the background noise. She caught a snippet of one of the thug's terrified ramblings. A green light, like lightning all around him. Green lightning. That wasn't in any file she had. She ran a search through every known metahuman database. Nothing. No registered meta in Gotham or any neighboring city matched the power signature. This was an unknown. A variable of catastrophic potential wearing one of the city's most volatile symbols. Her mind raced through the implications. A metahuman with this level of power, operating as a vigilante with an obviously brutal methodology, was a powder keg waiting to explode. What was his goal? What were his limits? Did he have the same reluctance to kill that Jason usually, but not always, displayed? She patched a call through a secure channel. "Dick," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "We have a problem. A big one. And you're not going to like it." Bloodhaven. Dick Grayson, in his guise as Nightwing, landed gracefully on the edge of a rooftop, the wind whipping at his sleek, black and blue uniform. He had just finished wrapping up a car theft ring, a relatively quiet night for Bloodhaven. He was about to call it a night when Barbara's call came through. "Sending you the footage now," Her voice said in his ear, laced with a tension he rarely heard. A video file appeared in his HUD. He watched the grainy footage from the docks, his light-hearted mood evaporating like mist in the sun. He saw the red helmet, and his heart sank. Jason, he sighed. What's he done now? Watch it again, Dick. And look at the data I'm sending with it. Babs instructed. He replayed the clip, this time with her annotations. Trajectory analysis. Estimated velocity. Force calculations from the structural damage reports. His eyes widened. He saw the impossible speed, the sheer, explosive power implied by the mangled wreckage. That's not possible, he said, his voice dropping. Jason's strong, but he's not a Class 7 metahuman, no, Barbara confirmed. The survivors are talking about whips made of shadow and a green energy field. This isn't him, Dick. It's someone else. Someone new, using his symbol. Dick leaned against a ventilation unit, his mind reeling. He thought of his complicated, broken brother. Jason's identity as the Red Hood was born from his own personal hell, forged in pain and betrayal. It was his, for better or worse. The idea of someone else taking that symbol, that legacy of pain, and twisting it into something else, it felt like a violation, a desecration of his brother's grave, all over again. He analyzed the Phantom's movements in the clip. As an acrobat, a man whose entire fighting style was built on grace and momentum, he saw things others might miss. The figure's movements were fluid, almost unnaturally so. But where Nightwing's acrobatics were about evasion and redirection, this was different. Every movement, no matter how graceful, was a prelude to an explosion of overwhelming force. It was like watching a ballet dancer who could punch through a brick wall. The violence, Dick mused, thinking of the medical reports Barbara had attached. It's different from Jason's. How so? Jason's rage is hot, he explained, trying to put the feeling into words. He loses control. Sometimes he goes too far, sometimes he holds back. It's emotional. It's messy. According to these reports, every injury was deliberate. Shattered kneecaps, broken collarbones, compound fractures. All debilitating. All non-lethal. It's controlled. It's a cold rage. It's almost surgical. This, more than anything, is what unnerved him. A being with this much power, acting with this much brutal precision, was terrifying. It spoke of a discipline and a focus that, when combined with the Red Hood's persona, was a recipe for disaster. Bruce is going to lose his mind, Dick said, pinching the bridge of his nose. He already knows, Barbara replied, her tone grim. Tim's been on it for the last hour. And he's found something, the Batcave. Tim Drake was in his element. The rest of the family saw a crisis. Tim saw the most fascinating puzzle he'd encountered in years. He stood before the Batcomputer's massive holographic display, manipulating gigabytes of data with flicks of his wrist. Enhanced Sector Gamma. Frame 2317. He commanded, his voice sharp and focused. A blurry image of the new Red Hood appeared, magnified 1,000 times. It was pixelated, almost useless. Run predictive interpolation algorithm. Filter for atmospheric particle distortion, the computer word, and the image slowly resolved. It was still blurry, but clearer. Tim leaned in, his eyes narrowed. There, he pointed to the edge of the figure's silhouette. For a single frame, captured in the microsecond before the Hood launched himself, there was a flicker. A faint, ethereal crackle of emerald green light. It was barely visible, a ghost in the machine, but it was undeniably there. The energy signature is unlike anything on record, Tim explained as Bruce Wayne, clad in the full bat suit, stood behind him, his arms crossed, a monolith of grim silence. Alfred stood a respectful distance away, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of stoic concern. It's not magic, Tim continued, pulling up a dozen different energy spectrum analyses. Doesn't match Satana's readings or Constantine's usual brand of chaos. It's not technological, it leaves no EM residue. It's biological, but it violates the laws of thermodynamics. It's impossible energy. He swiped the screen, bringing up another piece of footage, this one from a traffic camera that caught the Hood landing on a rooftop. And look at this. The landing. Tim isolated the moment of impact. There was no telltale crouch to absorb the shock, no roll. The figure simply stopped, landing on the rooftop with a grace that defied gravity. The physics are all wrong, Bruce. It's like he can selectively alter his own inertia. And watch the descent to the docks. He played another clip. The figure didn't use a grapple. He simply floated down, a leaf on the wind, before accelerating into a blur of motion. Float, gearshift, black whip, F.A. Gene, danger sense, one for all, Bruce said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to absorb the light in the cave. Tim and Alfred turned to look at him, stunned into silence. Bruce's eyes were narrowed, fixed on the screen, but his gaze was distant, as if he were looking at something else entirely. I beg your pardon, Master Bruce? Alfred asked. Those are the names of the quirks, Bruce stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He turned away from the screen and began walking towards the memorial case that held Jason's old Robin uniform. The boy's name is Izuku Midoriya. Quirk, one for all. It allows him to stockpile and release immense amounts of raw power. It also grants him the quirks of its previous 7 wielders. He's from another Earth. Tim stared, his mouth agape. How could you possibly know that? Bruce stopped in front of the memorial case, his reflection a dark, demonic shape in the glass, superimposed over the ghost of his fallen son. Because I met him. 2 years ago, there was a multiversal incursion, a collaboration with heroes from his world to stop a mutual threat. It was brief. Classified. He reached out, his gloved fingers almost touching the glass. He was just a boy. Full of light. Hope. He smiled. He reminded me of Dick, in the beginning. The silence in the cave was now absolute, thick with the weight of this revelation. A boy from another world, with the power of a god, is in our city, wearing my dead son's helmet and breaking criminals with his bare hands, Bruce said, his voice dangerously quiet. What could have happened to that boy? What could Gotham have done to him, to turn him into this? The question hung in the air, unanswered and terrifying. For Bruce, this was a nightmare given form. He had always feared Jason's rage, feared the power of the Lazarus pit, feared the day his son would cross the line and kill. But Jason was, at his core, human. He could be reasoned with, fought, understood. This boy, this Izuku Midoriya, was something else. He possessed a power that dwarfed almost anyone Bruce had ever faced. And he was using it with the brutal persona of the one failure that haunted Bruce's every waking moment. It was a fusion of his 2 greatest fears, uncontrollable power, and his own personal, unforgivable sin. He feared this new hood would not only do what he always feared Jason would, but that he would do it on a scale that could shatter Gotham to its very foundations. Alfred, Bruce said, turning from the memorial, his eyes hard as flint. Prep the Fenrir suit. Alfred's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of alarm. Master Bruce, is that wise? That armor is designed for engagements with— I know what it's designed for. Batman cut him off. We are dealing with an unknown quantity with Superman-level power acting as a violent vigilante in our city. We cannot contain him with conventional methods. We need to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. He looked at Tim. Find him. I want to know where he is at all times. As Bruce strode towards the heavily armored vault that contained his most powerful and dangerous equipment, Tim turned back to the screen. The puzzle was no longer fascinating. It was terrifying. He finally understood the cold dread he saw in Bruce's eyes. The Red Hood had always been a ghost haunting Batman's legacy. But this new ghost had the power to burn the entire city to the ground. High above the city, perched on the head of a stone eagle adorning the peak of a Gothic skyscraper, the new Red Hood sat in perfect stillness. The helmet's internal sensors filtered the city's noise, isolating the frequencies of police scanners and encrypted channels. He was a silent predator, listening to the heartbeat of his new hunting ground. He felt no satisfaction from the night's work. No thrill. No righteous anger. He had analyzed the problem, Penguin's illegal arms trade, and he had applied a solution. The broken men, the destroyed shipment, they were just numbers in an equation. The equation of fixing this city. His mind was a cold, quiet place. The memory of Maya was a locked room, the door sealed shut. The image of All Might's smile was a faded photograph from another life. All that remained was the mission: dismantle the corrupt systems of this city, from the bottom up. Instill a fear so profound that the very idea of committing a crime would become unthinkable. He would be the justice this city deserved, because its heroes were unwilling to be. He looked down at his hands, clenching them into fists. The phantom sensation of one for all's power still hummed under his skin, a caged star waiting to be unleashed. It was a tool. Nothing more. The whispers in the underworld were right. There was a new ghost in Gotham. A ghost of a boy who used to be a hero, and it wore a face of blood red,